I think Senator Booker made a good point just a moment ago when he said we have to self-examine, we have to be introspective. And, I can't help but think of a line today. Jay Jones has the vision, commitment, and integrity to keep families safe. That's the endorsement of Senator Booker. This is a man who, if people have not been reading the news, has called for a Republican to be murdered, for his children to be murdered, for the children to die in their mother's arms. Senator Booker, in this spirit of introspection, is standing by this endorsement. So I suppose I would invite, perhaps I should have looked, because Senator Booker has left the room, and I think I can guess why.
This video clip, featuring Michael Knowles' testimony and subsequent analysis, is a powerful articulation of a deep-seated grievance felt by many conservatives. The systemic dismissal, denial, and even tacit encouragement of political violence emanating from the political left. The segment moves beyond a simple news report to become a scathing indictment of the Democratic Party and its media allies, portraying their response to the escalating crisis of political violence as a masterclass in deflection and hypocrisy. The realistic Republican reaction is not just to agree with Knowles, but to view his arguments as proof that the political establishment has created a two-tiered system of justice and outrage, where conservative rhetoric is scrutinized for intent, while progressive violence is excused for its cause. What follows is a detailed long-form analysis and reaction, structured as a political essay in favor of the Republican perspective, drawing directly from the evidence and arguments presented in the video. The politics of denial. Michael Knowles exposes the left's crocodile tears on political violence. The segment from Fox News, featuring Michael Knowles' testimony at a Capitol Hill hearing, is a moment of necessary clarity in a political landscape choked with partisan selective outrage. Knowles' observation that the Democrats are shedding crocodile tears is not merely hyperbole. It is a clinical diagnosis of a calculated political strategy designed to gaslight the American public and shield the left from accountability for the increasingly toxic rhetoric and literal violence being unleashed by its most fervent activists. This is the Republican reaction. The hearing itself was a performance, and the Democrats' absenteeism and immediate attempts to redirect blame prove that for the ruling party, political violence is not a crisis to be solved, but a useful tool to be weaponized against their opponents. The scandal of endorsement, when hypocrisy becomes policy. The most damning piece of evidence presented by Knowles, the one that caused Senator Booker to physically leave the room, was the continued endorsement of a political figure who allegedly called for the murder of Republicans and their children. This detail is not a fringe anecdote, it is the core of the problem. For Republicans, this is the unmistakable sign that the Democratic establishment's condemnation of violence is conditional. If a Republican were to endorse an individual who publicly called for the murder of a Democrat, the news cycle would be dominated by wall-to-wall coverage, immediate demands for resignation, and a swift severing of all ties. Yet when the reverse happens, when a high-profile Democrat stands by an endorsement of a man espousing lethal rhetoric, the response from the mainstream media is a deafening, politically convenient silence. This is where the crocodile tears accusation finds its foundation. A party cannot claim to be genuinely concerned about the breakdown of civil discourse and the safety of public servants while simultaneously validating and empowering those who actively call for political assassinations. The endorsement of Jay Jones in this context is not a simple oversight. It is a policy statement that suggests violence aimed at the political opposition is a forgivable, if not acceptable, transgression. The lack of accountability for Senator Booker reveals a profound moral rot. For the left, the ends of political power truly justify the most abhorrent means. The statistical sleight of hand, redefining terrorism. Knowles hits his stride when he challenges the narrative surrounding the source of political violence, pushing back on the lazy, media-driven consensus that the threat is overwhelmingly a right-wing problem. The Republican critique is that the statistical methods used to track domestic terrorism and political violence are inherently biased. As Knowles argues, even the emblem of liberalism, left-wing terrorism, is on the rise and exceeds right-wing terrorism. This is not an argument based on opinion. It's an indictment of the data itself. When federal statistics conveniently fail to categorize massive, coordinated destructive events like the BLM riots, which caused billions in property damage and led to dozens of deaths, as left-wing terrorism, the entire data set becomes useless for honest analysis. What the left calls protest, the right calls anarchy and politically motivated destruction. For Republicans, the evidence is overwhelming. The organized masked assaults carried out by Antifa against citizens and journalists. The targeted firebombing of crisis pregnancy centers and churches after the Dobbs decision. The literal takeover of city blocks and the destruction of businesses during the 2020 unrest. These are acts of domestic political terrorism, yet they are either ignored or worse, subtly rationalized by commentators who claim the perpetrators are simply reacting to systemic injustice. This refusal to acknowledge violence when it aligns with progressive ideology creates an impossible standard for conservatives. It allows Democrats to push the both sides argument, followed immediately by the caveat that it's mostly Republicans, while systematically erasing the left's record of physical and economic destruction. The incitement of dehumanization, the Hitler smear. The video touches on another critical Republican frustration: the constant, inflammatory rhetoric used by high-profile Democrats and commentators to dehumanize conservative leaders. Knowles references the persistent and demonstrably false, as far as the left is concerned, claim that Democrats don't compare Donald Trump to Hitler. The truth, as any Republican observer knows, is that the tactic of comparing conservative figures to historical fascists is a mainstream staple of Democratic rhetoric. When a major political figure is consistently likened to Hitler, a political opponent is not merely being criticized. They are being cast as an existential, non-human threat that must be stopped by any means necessary. This is the ultimate engine of political violence. It is not just the isolated extremist on the fringe, but the establishment politician, the celebrity, and the cable news anchor who constantly escalate the rhetoric. They tell their base, the man across the aisle is not a political opponent. He is a nascent dictator who is going to destroy democracy. By creating this apocalyptic frame, they sanction the use of violence. Despite the grim analysis, the segment concludes on a note of conservative hope, which is perhaps the most realistic part of the Republican reaction. Knowles shifts his focus from the cynical back and forth in Congress to the inspiring scene of unity and exchange among students, suggesting a healthier future is possible outside of the toxic political bubble of Washington. For conservatives, this is the core of the solution. Reject the political theater of denial and rediscover the principles of civil debate and mutual respect that exist among real people, not career politicians. The path forward is to hold leaders accountable, regardless of party, for their dangerous rhetoric and hypocritical policies. Until the Democratic Party stops shedding crocodile tears and starts acknowledging, condemning, and punishing the violence on its own side, the crisis will only deepen.